Hey everybody, it's Steve Howley here with the Family Peace Initiative, and welcome to another masterclass in BIP Facilitation, produced by the Family Peace Initiative. And uh, today I'm really happy to share with you the presentation that Darald Hanusa gave to our trauma-informed battering intervention community back in December. He has over 45 years of experience in working with those who cause harm in relationships, and the wisdom that he has developed over the years is very enlightening. I am so thankful that he was able to give this presentation to us, and I'm happy to share it with you today. So sit back, relax, and listen to Darald.
I came to doing the work by accident, but I stayed for another reason. And I think, we all have our own stories about how domestic violence has impacted us in our lives, one way, shape, form, or another. And so my partner, Kathy, has given me permission to share this, but I didn't really know what domestic violence was when I met her. And I came to find out that her mother was severely and savagely beaten by her father in a domestic violence drunken rage, and he broke her back, and she was paralyzed from the neck down. And Kathy was like 5 years old at the time, and so her mother died when she was 11, and she and her three sisters basically had to take care of her mother, who was bedridden, and their father continued to be abusive to them and continued having troublesome issues with alcohol. So, in I mean, I haven't been directly impacted by domestic violence the way Kathy has, but it definitely changed the structure of our family, in that she lost her mother and essentially her father as well. So it impacted her and our kids and our family. So it's to people, I came to this work by accident, but I stayed for a reason, because I started to think, this is pretty awful, and I'd like to see if I can make changes in the lives of people who are experiencing domestic violence. So it's a kind of a funny way to get there, and I think an important reason to stay. So I thought today I'd just share a little bit of some of the things I've learned over 5 years of practice. And I don't know about you all, but one of the things that's been interesting and difficult, and a lot of people ask me about, is how to deal with resistance when you deal with domestic violence harm doers. Typically, there's resistance that we have to deal with. So let me ask you, how do you all deal with resistance when you're dealing with clients who are resistance? What do you do?
I think the biggest thing for me is telling a story and finding something that's relatable to, like, the information or the lesson plan that's at hand. I think stories are translate, and um, so many of our, like, every guy has a story, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
that's what I do.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jim. Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I just briefly say that I'm learning to see resistance as a lack of nervous system safety, and so I just
Okay.
kind of move in a little, just kind of note that and just be more attentive to more openings and doorways.
Oh, that's beautiful. I like that. It's going to relate to what I want to share. That's fantastic. Any other ideas or
Yeah,
experiences?
kind of similar to Knowles is like kind of take a perspective or trying to find out the utility of the resistance.
Okay, cool. Well, you all are a lot smarter than I am. So, because when I started doing this work, I came from an approach that was pretty much standard in the field, and that is that there's this oppositional behavior, and I was kind of taught that it's my job to deal with it and to convince these guys that I was right and they were wrong. So it was a pretty confrontational approach, and it never felt right, and it never worked very well. And so over time, thankfully, early on in my work, I became to understand that what I'm dealing with, kind of what you said, Knowles, is that I'm dealing with men who are afraid. I'm dealing with fear. And as I thought about it and started doing some work on that, I really came to understand that fear is our body's natural response to facing reality. And and for harm doers, the reality was twofold. One is they had to admit that they were abusive. And the other part of the reality is they learned that they had no clue as to how to fix it. And so as I started relating to their fear rather than trying to confront them and change their minds, it really changed the dynamic. And so I could sit back and not have to challenge them and just help them understand uh, what was going on with them and how helping them reduce their fear, help them reduce their resistance, and join with them. And Jim, as you said, sharing stories that connects is was really up there as well. So I don't know what you all think about that, but it really helped me, and so hopefully it's something you can think about and use in your work. And again, if you have any comments about anything I'm sharing, just pipe in. Any comments or reactions to that? All right. All right.
Darald, I would just tell you, I would validate what you're just saying. In the work that we're doing, and many of these people have experienced, we talk a lot about fear as being a real foundation of change and learning to be less afraid of our own story, which is really facing reality, right? And I appreciate what you're saying. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, when I found that definition, I don't remember who it's attributed to, but that fear is our body's natural reaction to facing reality. I really thought about that, and then think about the reality of the men who come in for help. Facing that reality is tough, and that's where sometimes the resistance comes in because they don't want to admit it and they don't know what to do about it, and so they're kind of at a loss. And so, helping them face that is I think just transformational for them. At least it was for me. So I'd like to, if there are no other questions or comments, I want to move on and talk about some experiences that I had that have been transformational for me, and I call it a place for empathy, compassion, and understanding trauma-based shame. And you all know this. You've been doing this work, and I know it too. But we learn from our clients. This is not a one-way street. We are not the holders of expertise, and we know everything. And if you approach helping anybody that way, I think you're at a disadvantage. And I've learned so much from the people that I've worked with over the years. I don't know how many I've worked with over the years, but too many to count. I used to keep track of it because it was important, but after you've done this for a while, keeping track of the numbers no longer means as much as the experiences that you've had. And so I want to tell you the story about Charlie. And I was just a baby therapist when I started doing this work, and I had this guy named Charlie, and I'd only been doing the work for about a year. And so I was wet behind the ears. And quite honestly, looking back, I didn't have very good training from the people who I worked with, unfortunately. So I kind of was left on my own. And so I had this guy named Charlie who came in for treatment for help. And we used Murray Strauss's woman abuse scale, conflict tactics scale, to evaluate how much abuse has been in and the nature of the abuse in the relationship. So I'm sitting with Charlie and I'm going through this assessment tool. Have you ever done these things? And there are 26 items on the conflict tactics scale at that point. I think it's been revised since then. And he said yes to everything on the scale. He even said yes that he raped his partner and shot a weapon at her one time when she was trying to leave, and he wanted to scare her to stay. And I was shocked. This is the first time that I had anybody admit that level of violence, and I thought, oh my God. And so I looked at him, and here's how naive I was. I looked at it and I said, Charlie, my God, that's one hell of a lot of abuse. Not the way I'd handle it today, but I didn't know any better back then. And at that point, he gave me two gifts that really changed me at my core in terms of how I do my work. And he said, the first thing he said is, and he was dead serious. He looked at me in the eye and he said, "That's not abuse. That's the way men are supposed to treat women." And so that was his belief about the proper way that men have a relationship to women. And it blew me out of the water. I naively assumed back at that point in my little bit of experience that men just understood that that's not okay and that's not how men treat women. And so he gave me this different view that, boy, I need to really be sure that I understand where these guys are coming from in terms of what they believe abuse is and what it isn't. And so I really did a better job after that at assessing that. But the second thing he gave me was even more important. And he shared with me his personal story. And his personal story was that he was adopted at an early age to an immigrant family that moved here to the United States to find their fame and fortune. And they believe this was back, he was 50 at the time I saw him. So this must have been probably, in the late 40s or mid 40s anyway. So he was charged with helping the family earn money because that's what kids did back then. So at the tender age of 3 or 4, he was sent out to the neighborhood to peddle vegetables from their family garden and to help people weed their gardens and to do whatever odd jobs he could do. And when he would come home after a day's work, his mother would strip search him and take the money because he had a tendency to be a little manipulative and try to save some money because it was his money. And he said to me, this was really resentful for me because all my friends were out playing and having fun, and their parents would buy baseball cards with bubble gum in it, and I didn't get anything, and I was working so much harder than they were, and I just felt resentful. So he said, so I would steal my money back sometimes, and he said my mom kept the money on the countertop in the kitchen under a cheesecloth, he called it, and she had every penny counted to the penny. And so when money was missing, she knew, and she also had the evidence because he come up with baseball cards that she knew the only way you could get those to take money. And this family believed, coming from the old school, believed in pretty strict punishment. And so mom was a seamstress, and for punishment, when money was missing, she took her sewing needles and drove her needles through his fingertips, punish him, out of the belief that you punish the hand that did the stealing. She would go into his bedroom at 3 o'clock in the morning and tear the covers off the bed and throw scalding hot water on him as punishment. He pulled up his pant leg and he showed me where the hair never grew back on his leg because of the scar tissue. And he said to me, if you want to know what trauma is and what violence is, I'll tell you what it is. That was happening to me when I was 3 and 4 years old. What I've done to her didn't even come close. And I thought to myself, wow, if I'm going to work with these guys, I need to know their trauma histories. I need to know where they're coming from. I can't just assume that they're these bad, evil people with no past. And so it really opened some doors for me, and it led me to think about, their personal traumas and what I need to do to work with that. And so as I did my work, I started to think about, well, why is it so hard for these guys to get past their trauma and have empathy for the pain that they've caused in their partners? And so Dan Saunders and I had a grant from the National Institute of Mental Health. I don't know if that agency is still in existence anymore with the current administration, but back then we had this grant. And we did some research on outcome research on different kinds of group process, and so I was interested in knowing. There are three kinds of people that go into that do treatment and complete treatment. Well, those who don't are called dropouts, so we don't have much data on them, unfortunately. But then even among the group of completers, there are kind of two groups of completers: those who do really well and don't get back into the cycle of violence, and those who don't, and they simply kind of get back into it. And I was interested in that group. And I had done all the treatment for all those groups for those years we did that research. So I was connected with pretty well, and I started to think about them. And you know how you can kind of tell that people are telling you the right things and they learn the language and the lingo, but you kind of get this sense that they're not quite there. And it's sort of like when you take a break and you leave the room and you come back and all the guys are laughing, and the minute the facilitators walk in, it's dead silence. So you know there's some language goes on that they know you wouldn't approve of, kind of a thing. And so I started to think about their lack of empathy, and I thought, well, geez, empathy is pretty important. And so I was, reading some of the work by Ed Gondorff, who I'm sure you know his work, and he was talking about the fact that domestic violence harm doers lack empathy. And that's one of the main features. And so I said, well, it makes sense if they have their own victimization. So how am I going to teach these guys to have empathy? So then I started to think about, well, they have their own experiences, and like all of us, if we are sharing something with somebody and they share an experience and we have an experience that's similar, it brings us closer together. And like you were saying, who said that? I think it was Jim, about sharing the story that kind of brings us together. And I thought, well, that's probably the way I'm going to help them teach empathy, because or learn empathy. We just can't say, well, tonight's empathy group, ready, set, go, and learn about empathy. So what I did is I structured a module in the groups. We talked about abuse and what abuse is, and helped them have a chance to talk about their pain and how they were treated. And they're a little bit timid about that at first. I mean, some guys let me just do a sidebar. There's more than one kinds of trauma, and there's trauma that's called big T traumas. And the big T traumas are the ones we think about when people talk about their trauma: being beaten, being sexually abused, the kind of assault kind of trauma that you read about so often or hear about. The subtle stuff is called little T traumas. And that it's slipperier, but it's no less severe than the big T traumas. That's being ignored by a parent, being bullied by a sibling, not being paid attention to, made to feel like you're not measuring up. And so as I help these men share their stories, they got into what their trauma was. So initially, when you ask them, tell us about your abuse, they would say, "Well, I've never been abused." And the nice thing about the work that I was doing is that it's really long-term work. The program that I do, the Adam program, is a 14-month program. And it's a 44 session program. So I get to know these guys pretty well. In fact, even before that, my whole evaluation process takes 8 sessions to complete. So I know them from start to finish. I know their families. I know the names of their pets. I know their father's name, their mother's name. I know their siblings. I know a lot about them. So when they start to say, "Well, I've never been abused," I can say something to help them tap into that. So I was working with this man one time who came from an abusive family, and he said in group one time, "Well, this is bullshit. I've never been abused." And I knew his story, and his story was that his family raised rabbits for slaughter, for meat, and they sold the meat as part of family income. And they had something like 30 or 40 rabbits that he was responsible for taking care of. And one day he went off to school and he forgot to water the rabbits. And when he came home after school, his dad said, "Did you water the rabbits this morning?" He said, "No, I forgot." He said, "You better get your ass out there to water those rabbits." So he goes out to water the rabbits, and all of them were dead. His father killed every one of the rabbits while he was at school as a lesson to him. And he says to the group, "I've never had trauma in my life." So I said to him, "Bruce, tell us a story about the rabbits." And he stopped and told a story. Excuse me. Some of this stuff is pretty emotional for me as well. Hmm. And so what I do in the program is to have them talk about their own pain, and they do that as well as they can. And at the end of that sequence, I'd say to them, okay, so I want you to do something with your experience. I want you to put it in the form of poetry. I want you to write about your experience in the form of poetry. And they some of them scoff at me, some of them laugh at me, and some of them say, well, we can't write poetry. And but then they simmer down a little bit and they say, okay, I really do want you to write in the form of poetry. I'm serious about that. And they do, and it's amazing. And I wonder if you'd like to hear an example of a poem that they wrote. Okay. You're all shaking your head, so I was sure with you. A guy by the name of Larry wrote this, and most of the guys give the poems a title, and he gave his a title. Not all of them do, but a lot of them do. And so this is called Reflections of Dad. The car door slams, chills run through my body. He's home, he's been drinking. I must take care of my family. Be still, be quiet, and listen. The yelling, the screaming, the crying, the beating begins and the night never ends. The hatred and fear fill my bones as I call my brother on our walkie-talkie phones. Are you okay? I ask. He whispers, I'm fine. And I know in my heart I must help my mom. As I open the door, I see tears rolling down her face. He just keeps hitting her. Isn't there any safe place? I run down the stairs and I jump on his back. I start hitting him and yelling, please, Dad, please stop. This is the man I never wanted to be, as I look back to my father and all the hateful memories. But it's not over yet as I look in the mirror, and all I can see is reflections of my dad staring at me. It scares me why I couldn't see how this is the man I've turned out to be. Each day is a struggle to turn my life around, and soon my home will be that safe ground. With hope and with time, love and peace. Next time I look, it will be my own reflections I see. Comments, questions?
I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, when the men read them, there's hardly a dry eye in the room. It really is emotional. And just any other comments before I make another observation?
Just appreciate you sharing it. I think it is definitely brought up some feelings for me of conversations that we've had in our groups of, I didn't want to be like my dad,
Yeah.
and now I'm here and I'm doing the same thing. So I think there's a couple of my guides that came to mind as you read that I can see kind of their journey.
Thank you for sharing that.
I just wanted to quickly add that I'm struck by the profound cruelty of the rabbit story, given especially in juxtaposed next to the fact that the father never laid a hand on the kid, and yet it's
Right.
still such a profound expression of cruelty. Yeah, that
Right.
really struck me to my core.
Yeah, and that's why this guy could say I've never been abused, because he thought about being abused means being slapped around or punched or something. But he was crushed by that, and experience really having a chance to talk about it really allowed him to come to terms with that pain. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Knowles.
I was just going to say that I was struck by that too, and how a lot of times that the emotion is driving the narrative, and guys are so afraid of feeling that it connects in ways that we can't typically connect when we're just in our conscious mind and telling the same story we've told over and over. It's a different way to access that feeling.
It's amazing, and can I just springboard off that? So, as we talk about these guys about their trauma, like you say, Jim, they'll kind of minimize it and not really take it to the depths that I think they need to go. But when they write poetry, it's amazing to me what happens. And they'll start talking about experiences when they write their poems that they never shared with the group. And so I think poetry really takes them another level where they have to really think metaphorically and get into the other side of their brain that really allows them to experience that. And I'm always surprised because they'll talk about some things that happened to them with the rest of the group, but when they read their poetry, it's like, wow, you never shared that before. And they said, writing that poem really helped me think about some things that I hadn't thought about and didn't have access to. I don't know how many of you use writing for the people you work with, but there's a whole psychology of writing that is really useful, and particularly how to use poetry and psychotherapy is pretty interesting. So if you're interested in that work, you can certainly explore that. And I just find it so interesting, and I don't even remember how I came across that idea to have them write in poetry, but it's been so useful, and I have literally hundreds and hundreds of poems that I have saved over the years, and I keep on had in the back of my mind to publish an anthology of poems written by domestic violence harm doers, but I've never gotten around to doing it. So I have all these poems, but they're pretty amazing. And so, it's maybe worth a try in your work and just what happens and what they come up with and how it helps them get to a different level of dealing with their fear and coming to facing their reality. So that's not the end of the story. So while all this was going on, I had a colleague. I taught at the School of Social Work at UW-Madison for 41 years, and one of my colleagues, Sharon Berlin, was an expert in shame, and she dealt with a lot of substance abuse people, troublesome alcohol, mostly troublesome use of alcohol, and so I learned from her about shame. And you probably know this as well, but there's the difference between shame and guilt. Guilt is the feeling of discomfort that comes when you've made a mistake or committed a moral wrongdoing. Shame is a feeling of discomfort that comes when you believe you are a mistake, different than making a mistake. And she did a lot of writing, wrote a book on this, and she said that shame is a feeling of inadequacy, that you don't measure up, you're not worthy of love and belonging, no matter what. And people don't want to expose shame because to expose their shame is tantamount to social annihilation. The idea is that if people know how really awful I was, they wouldn't come even close to me, not with even 10 feet. So it's pretty risky to share that shame, right? So what do people do? They cover it up. And Sharon, in her research, said there's 4 ways that people cover up their shame. One is through pushing back aggressively. And it can be from passive aggressive silent treatment all the way to rage. And some people call shame the shame rage connection. A second way they deal to cover up the shame is grandiosity. I'm the very worst, or I'm the very, very best, or I'm the very worst. Charlie, who I shared that story with, he was on the end of grandiosity, that I'm the very best. But that's another way to cover it up. If you're that great, no one's going to challenge you. If you say you're very the worst, they're going to leave you alone because if they figure you already admitted it. The second way is really an interesting one, and that is perfectionism. And in this case, perfectionism is not striving for excellence. That we do for ourselves. Perfection is about people pleasing, that we have to do things just perfect, because if we don't, people aren't going to love us. So we don't practice authenticity. We give away the farm. We do everything that everybody else wants us to do. And then we end up feeling how? Resentful. And the other end of that of perfectionism is procrastination. And that is, if we can't do it perfectly well, we don't try at all. The idea of believing it's better to be criticized for not trying than it is to try and fail. So we just don't try. And the fourth way is to withdraw. We hide out. We keep our head down so people can't see us, and then we can't be criticized. So those 4 behavioral patterns, as I talk with the men that I work with, they go, oh yeah, I do that one, I do that. Most of them say I do them all. And the problem is, like the way people with troublesome use of alcohol use alcohol as a solution, they use these 4 behaviors as a solution. And guess what? It doesn't help. It just makes it worse. So then as I'm thinking about, their trauma and these men's trauma, I start to think about, well, how does trauma relate to shame? And I started to do the research on, what shame causes. And there's a whole literature out there on the connection between shame and violence, particularly in interpersonal relationships. When people are step in that shame bucket, they respond by pushing back. And so I thought, well, that's really something. And I call it trauma-based shame, just kind of connecting all the pieces. And the time was really kind of interesting back 25 years ago, as Steve said, when I started putting this all together. And so I started relating to men's shame, and I started to teach them about shame and what it is. And we started to help them figure out ways to deconstruct that shame, to get them out of the shame rage connection. And so, for instance, if you grew up in a family where you were told that you were stupid and you didn't know how to handle anything, and that was a constant message from your family, and you get in a relationship and you're in a partnership with a partner who says to you, how could you be so stupid? You can't do anything right. And that takes you right back to your childhood experience. And so what do you do to respond to that? Do you use the tools you've learned in group? Do you use your tools to really stay calm and respond constructively? You do not. You go right to that shame piece and protect yourself, which means you fire back. You get equally verbally abusive, or you escalate it to physical abuse, a grab, a shove, a slap. And so coming to terms with that is important. So part of the work that I've been doing is to help men understand these critical moments, I call them, where there's a comment that elicits a shame reaction from them. And I don't call it a trigger, because calling it a trigger means that they don't have any ability to respond any differently. So I call it a critical moment, which means they have a choice about how they respond at that critical moment. So I help them understand what happened. So what happens when she said that to you? Well, I felt disrespected and I felt put down. And I said, so that comment, made you feel disrespected. Yeah, just like my dad used to say to me. And so you can see how that ties together. So I help reconstruct a different reality, that at that critical moment, rather than thinking she was putting you down, how else could you have thought about that? And so this gets into kind of the cognitive behavior work that I do. And you probably all, do some of that yourselves to help them have a different internal dialogue about it so they can see it differently and not have to go to that point of having to use some sort of abuse to disconnect from that partner to push back. And there's, lots of examples. And I just wonder, I would like you to share some of your experiences with that. So, at those times when you're working with men and it seems to that like they have that reaction, that they're believing that people are telling them that they're inadequate, and worse than that, they're not worthy of love and belonging. What have you seen in your work with domestic violence harm doers that where you could tap into that shame piece? I think that was a long-winded question, but a question nevertheless.
I
Go
oh
ahead.
sorry. I
Go
was
ahead.
working with a gentleman the other day who was telling me about how his wife had spent his Christmas bonus on presents for their kids, and how that was really frustrating for him, and that he had lashed out at her because of that. And I tried to get curious about like what exactly about it was the struggle, and the struggle for him was that that she did it without his permission, not that she spent the money, but that she hadn't asked first.
Good for you, Emma. That's really great. And so then you can see how it's easy to connect that because she didn't have permission. It must be that you're a worthless piece of shit, that you're not worthy of being asked somebody's permission. Now, pardon my language, but I mean that's the way I think, because that's how the guys I work with think. But
Sure.
you can see the connection. It must be something about me that I'm inadequate or unworthy, or she would have asked me. And then they translate that into being disrespected. And the feeling of disrespect, I don't know about you all, but at those critical moments, men share, I felt disrespected. That feeling alone is such a huge critical moment for them that they respond to with trying to, right the wrong by pushing back abusively. But thanks for sharing that, and that's really, exactly what I'm talking about. Any other examples?
I had a guy in group recently who very, very successful, 60 years old, a surgeon, and the whole grandiosity thing. And
Uh,
I use my intellect. I don't get into emotional arguments. Da, 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 da. And just the last meeting, I mentioned how, yeah, my father was violent, and we were talking about emotional abuse. And I said my father was violent, and he goes, yeah, my dad was violent too. And he said he took a swing at me once, and he put his fist through a plate glass window,
wow.
and he was bleeding. His fist is from his hand profusely bleeding, and his mother was crying, upset. And I says, "How do you feel in that moment?" He said, "I felt good." And this is a guy who was saying, "I don't have any emotions." Well, see, you just gave us an emotion there, didn't you?
Wow.
And I don't know if there's shame involved there, but there's a capacity too, I guess, when you're looking for an emotion that leads to empathy or feeling.
Yeah,
You get examples of maybe it's not there.
right. Oh, well, you did a great job of drawing him out and helping him connect to that. And I'll bet there's a huge, huge pool of shame under that as well. It's glad that you mentioned physicians. We work with people across the spectrum, and we work with a lot of people who are pretty accomplished, pretty successful. I have a contract, EAP contract with the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine, and so I work with a lot of docs. People are in residency and attendings, and so they'll come in and we'll start talking, and a lot of them are dealing with anxiety and an imposter phenomenon that if people really knew how little I knew, I'd get kicked out of this place. But I start to talk with them about their experiences, and they say, um, I never felt like I measured up. My father never complimented me. I was always made to feel like no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. And they're in tears. And it is really getting to that layer underneath the layer of that pain of not being acknowledged and believing I'm inadequate. Something's wrong with me. I'm fatally flawed. And that's the message of shame. Like you can't fix it. This is your cast, you're cast in that for life. And that's so mistaken, but that's how we feel. And so patient after patient, client after client who come in, and when they're able to get comfortable with you and share on that level and really talk about their shame and the pain associated with that, it's amazing. It's just amazing. So I think, Jim, you were on to it. He shared that he felt happy or glad, but I'll bet if you worked at another level, he'd be able to say that there's something underneath that as well. That there's something other than feeling good because, he felt good because his father got something that he just felt he deserved and didn't deserve it. His father got it, but I bet there's more than that underneath that. Other comments, reactions?
Think the biggest shame one that comes to mind that I think about that shows up is like the being a man enough, right? Like what was instilled in them of what it meant to take care of their families.
Yes.
And when that's being questioned or having words used against them that makes them feel less than a man, that's when a
Yeah.
lot of shame and those defense mechanisms come out.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And Taylor, it can be pretty overt, but it can be pretty subtle too. So a partner saying, "Oh yeah, don't forget to do X, Y, Z," and being told to do something that they already know about offends their belief that you're telling me I'm stupid that I can't remember things. It can be that subtle and trigger a shame reaction. And so I really, again, getting them to the point where at those critical moments they can have a different internal dialogue about what that means. I mean, at that critical moment, you can interpret what she said as a put down and that you're inadequate, or you can say, "Oh, she's just trying to be helpful. I do forget things a lot of the time. I really appreciate her concern." And at that critical moment, you have a choice. And that's where you take your power back because you can choose which way you want to handle it. And depending upon how you choose, it's going to send you down one path or another. And then we tie that into what was the message that she was saying to you. And she's saying, I'm an idiot. I don't remember anything. And then we can help deconstruct that as well, because that's the shame piece. You're inadequate. Any other comments, reactions, or things you want to check in with about that?
Yeah, just a quick question for you, Darald. I know you started with the question of resistance, and I'm just curious, in all your years of work, do you find that when you have these opportunities with men, these critical, where you can point out these critical moments,
Right.
um, you know, I don't know. I guess I'm wondering about success rate. It's a funny way of putting it, but I'm just wondering how often you meet resistance and the road stops versus, because you've built such a beautiful rapport with these men, and they trust you, how often you have this opportunity to travel that path that leads to the transformational moments.
Well, that's a great
Yeah, go ahead.
that's a great question. Well, couple things. Number one, I sit with these guys for a long time. I'm with them for over a year, 14 months really. And so I have a chance to build a connection with them. And so they struggle with making progress. And when they're up against it, then we can talk about what is that about. And it's usually about, you know, not wanting to go there, not wanting to face their pain. Um, but success is such an interesting question, how do we define success? And there's lots of ways to define it. Just from a psychometric perspective, we're a database program. We do a lot of collection of information that helps us look at what kind of progress they're making. But more importantly, we have a connection with their partners. And so we check with their partners because a lot of guys want to look good because I know them and I'm connected with them. They want to please me too. That perfectionism piece that I talked about, that's part of their shame shield. And so they don't want me to know they're failing. And so being connected to their partners is incredibly important. And we meet with these partners while we're doing the evaluation phase. And I have them come in and we do a process called a timeout interview. And it's not a therapy session. It's a way for me to teach a conflict management technique. You probably know about timeouts. But when things are escalating, well, let me tell you the story. What happens when people get angry and they get abusive? Oftentimes they'll say to their partners, fuck you, I'm leaving. They slam the door and they leave. And she's sitting there waiting and worried about what's going to happen and is he going to come back and what kind of shape is he going to be in? And so we didn't address that very well when I first started doing this work. Remember when I said we started doing this work, there weren't any guidelines for how to do the work. So we're doing this group, and there's this guy in group who was a regular attender. He was doing, I thought, okay. So one day he didn't show up. And then the next week he came in and I said to him, so Greg, where were you? And he said, well, I was in jail thanks to you. And I said, well, what? And he said, yeah, I tried to use that timeout thing and I got arrested. I said, well, what in the world happened? So I called his partner and she said, yeah, he tried to use timeout. He did the thing he's always done. He said, fuck you, I'm going to time out and slammed the door and left. Well, that's not what it is. Timeout is, I'm really feeling angry. I need to take a timeout. I'm going to go for a walk around the block. I'll be back in a half an hour. And if you want to talk about it, then I'd be willing to. That's how it's supposed to go. Not F you, I'm out of here. She said he didn't, the only thing he said that was different is I'm taking a time out. All the rest of it was the same. So I thought, oh my God, we're setting these women up by not letting them know that there's that what timeouts are all about. So at that point, we systematically started inviting the women in to teach about timeout. And then it takes about a half an hour to go through that process because we actually do a role play with it. We have to try it out for size and see how it works for them. And then we invite the man to leave and either sit in the waiting room or go home because I want to spend some time with her. So this gives me a chance to check in with her one-on-one. And I say to him before he leaves, this is not a tattletale session. I just want to know from her perspective, are there some things about you that you could share with me that will help me in my work with him? Because they're so afraid they're going to spill the beans, right? The things that they don't know. So they leave and I spend some time with her and she tells me, well, just be aware that he had a traumatic family and be aware that he drinks too much and be aware that um, uh, XYZ. And then I say, well, what's good about him? And so I want to know that side of it too. I want to know about positive things. She said, well, he can be kind and he's good to the kids most of the time. And so I get a profile of this guy that I wouldn't otherwise get. And now what do I have? I have a connection with her. And so before she leaves, I say, here's my phone number. Call me at any point if there's something I should know. And if it's something you share with me, I won't ever share it with him until you give me approval or permission to do that. But I want you to know that I'm here to hear anything I need to know. So that's kind of how that piece of it goes. Then we finish the evaluation. And I tell her and him that I'd like her to come. I'd like you, I'm talking to her, I'd like you to come back if you're wanting to hear the results of the assessment. And I would say 100% of the women say, yeah, I want to come back. And so they come back, and then I share with her there everything that he told me about his experience and what he needs to learn with her sitting there. Why is that important? Well, unbelievably, these guys don't gleefully run home after evaluation and say, honey, guess what I get to do? I get to do this program for men who are abusive. They don't do that. They don't say anything. And so because there's trust issues, because that's the first thing that gets destroyed when there's abuse, she doesn't know what to trust him, whether to trust him or not. So when she's sitting there and I'm reading back the things he shared with me, including all the items on the woman abuse scale, she can compare her reality to what he's sharing. Why is that important? Why do women stay in abusive relationships for the length that they do? They're hopeful. They're hoping he's going to change. And I don't want to be part of a system that gives her false hope and stays longer than she should. So having access to that data, she can make a better choice. Is he lying? Is he being manipulative? Is there some chance that he might change or not? And so that's why we do it the way we do it. It's how I structured those evaluations. I think I got off on a tangent here a little bit, Knowles, but that helps me know a little bit about success. Then, to the extent that we can, so that's the first data point when she comes in for the evaluation. We contact her at midway point after the first 20 sessions. Then we contact her at the end of the program to find out, how things are going. And we ask her some important questions. By virtue of your partner having gone through treatment or in treatment, do you feel any safer today than the day he started? By virtue of your partner having gone through treatment, is he better able to understand the pain he's put you through? Yes or no? By virtue of your partner having gone through treatment, is the safety of your children improved by virtue of that treatment? Yes or no? By virtue of going through treatment, have we made it worse? And it's because, we can't assume that we're just going to make it better. Has it become worse? So we ask you these questions that help us understand is the impact we're having working? And the bottom line question is, by virtue of your partner having through treatment, do you feel safer today than when he started? And why is that the most important question, do you think?
Well, that's one of our primary things with the victims and survivors is to ensure safety.
Exactly. It's the safety factor that keeps women in relationships more than anything else. Economics is a close second, but if she's not feeling safe, to leave, then she won't. And you know, so what, it's really interesting. Another way to measure success, Knowles, is that women, it's not safe for women to leave abusive relationships always, is it? We know that that's the highest time, except when the men are in treatment, when they're in an intervention program. Why? Because he's connected to us. And if his partner should decide to end the relationship while he's in treatment with us, we can help him deal with that feelings he has about that. And so that oftentimes happens. They'll leave during the program. And so that is considered a success in my mind. If she can leave now and she couldn't before, and now he's got help to deal with that, and I consider that a treatment success that she's now safe enough to leave, even though I can't go to her house and protect her if something should happen, but she's feeling more confident. The other thing about success, and you will probably experience this, but at some point in the group, men start coming in and they're saying, she's angrier than I am. Don't you have a group for these darn women? And I say, well, what are you talking about? Well, she's doing this, that, and the other thing. And I say, congratulations. Congratulations. And they say, what? What are you talking about? And I say, it says to her that you're making enough progress that she can now tell you how pissed off she is at you and how painful this has been for her. She wouldn't tell you that if she felt that you were going to react abusively when you told them that. And so congratulations, you're making some real progress. So that's another way to think about success. And they don't think about it that way. They think this woman is starts with a B and ends with a H, but they think, oh yeah, I guess that's right. She wouldn't be telling me that if she was still so afraid of me. So just some ideas about how I measure successes. And the other thing, I don't know if you all experience this or not. Darn it, these guys keep coming back. Do you ever experience that? So I'm with these guys for a year, and the guys come in and they say, oh, I'm not that bad. I don't need a year-long program. This is crazy. This is baloney. How much of a kickback are you getting from the county? I don't want to be here. And all this stuff they say. And the ones that give me the most trouble are the ones at the end of the program go, my God, this is the best thing I've ever been through. I'm sure you've experienced that. And then they leave treatment and they don't want to leave necessarily. And I say to them, the men in our group, they have to do what's called buddy contacts. And so they meet outside the group on a weekly basis with their buddies. And I suggest to them that they should continue meeting as a group after the group is over on a voluntary basis. And they do that. A lot of times they do. But next thing I know, they're out for a couple months, 6 months, a year, 2 years. And they call me up and say, I need to come in. I need some help. I'm starting to fall back into some of my old patterns. Can I come in to see you? And I say, sure. And so I get them back in. And so I see at any one point in time, I'm probably dealing with a half a dozen, if not more, men who have been through the program and come back to do, I call it a booster session or some refresher work. And the ones that come back are interesting enough, the ones that have the big struggle with. What issue do you think they have the biggest struggle with? Starts with an S. Shame. They have the biggest issue of deconstructing shame. It's a powerful thing, but we don't spend enough time on it in group. And so they come back to do some more work on shame issue. And I wish we had more time, but our program's already 44 sessions. And it's hard for me to add more without getting pushback from referral sources. Like, how long is your program? We're going to look around and find a shorter program. And I always say to them, be my guest. You get what you pay for, But just to comment about the shame stuff, everybody has it. I'm going to, every one of you all have your own shame history, and I have mine. Nobody wants to talk about it, and so we don't deal with it. James loves to stay in hiding. The shame's victory over us is it stays in hiding, and so dealing with it is really important. And the way that we cut through shame is by practicing vulnerability. And vulnerability is about sharing our feelings and asking for what we want. And that is, incredibly important. And empathy is the piece that does that. And that's why teaching these guys empathy is so critically important. And they stumble with it, and they don't always do a really good job because outside the group, they don't get any support for it. That's the thing that's so difficult. I say to these guys at our first session, I'm going to apologize to you now because I'm setting you up. And they say, what do you mean? And I say, well, you're going to learn some things here that nobody out there knows and is going to support when. And so when you learn that nobody can make you angry, that's a choice. And somebody says to you, you pissed me off. And you say, no, I didn't piss you off. That's a choice you made. They're not going to like that, and they're not going to understand that, and you're going to get pushback. So I apologize to you in advance that you're going to be the standard bearers. You're going to have to teach other people what you know, because that's the only way we're going to change this culture of violence and help people understand how to take responsibility for their behavior. And so they get it after a while, and they do use it in ways that I think are really constructive. And they understand that people don't lose control. They choose control. People can't make them angry. Anger is a secondary emotion, and underneath that, helping them to be emotionally literate is really key. I'm sure you all do that work. Helping them understand the power principle, that in a situation where you believe you've just lost your power, in the culture that says, especially for men, when it comes to power, some is good, more is better, and too much is just right. And so when you feel powerless and it's connected to your shame, you overuse the power you have. Well, what power do you have to overuse? The power to do what? To be violent, to get what you want, or abusive in some way. Well, guess what happens when you do that? When your behavior becomes the focus of negative attention, you give away your right to hold other people accountable for their behavior. So you lose every time. It's like two teenagers are walking down the hall in high school. One teenager calls the other teenager a nasty name. The teenager that gets called a nasty name punches the other teenager out, gets expelled. Who gets expelled? The puncher. They both probably get in trouble, but the person who punched the other person made their behavior the focus of negative attention. And they lose their right to hold the other person accountable. Well, the guys are doing that all over the place. They're using their power in a way that's destructive, making their behavior the focus of negative attention. I swear, if these guys are on their deathbed, their last breath is going to be, I don't want to make my behavior the focus of negative attention, because I repeat that 10,000 times during the course of the group. And I'll say to them when we have our success stories, how was it successful for you? I didn't make my behavior the focus of negative attention. I was not abusive at that critical moment. Yay, good job. And so that's really some kind of bedrock principles that that teach in the program. And you probably all do the same thing in your own language. But it all comes back to that shame piece, and defeating shame is about practicing vulnerability, expressing your feelings, because that is the key to it all. All right. I could go on for hours. I don't know how long you intended to go today. But anything else you want to say, or any comments, or let's open it up to just general questions as well.
Darald, I think we should just stop and take a break and then come back for a couple more hours real quick and listen to you some more. It is a Friday. I'm sure no one has other things to do more important than listening to you. Quite honestly, this has been wonderful.
Well, thank you. Well, I was thinking the same thing. Maybe just take a half-hour lunch break and then come back and go to maybe about 8 o'clock tonight.
Yeah, that's kind of the equivalent of the FPI evening session, and we'll send out some pizza coupons for everybody, and it'll be all good. No, people, generally speaking, this is an hour to an hour and a half, but obviously people have been leaving as they've, had other meetings.
Sure.
But, I would love if we have a minute to just open this up to some questions for Darald, or comments, or what his comments have stirred up in your mind. I'm thinking all kinds of fun things, and I really appreciate the stimulation of thought. What are you all what's on your mind? What comes up just listening to Darald? And let's have a bit of a conversation.
Well, Darald, I just want to say how much I appreciate everything that you've said and your years and years of experience and work. And it just all seems so relatable. And while you say that you're sure that all of us do it in our own way, I think some of the takeaways were just some of the language choices that you used, whether it's about the what fear is and how vulnerability is attached with empathy and just the whole thing. I just appreciate so much your sharing of your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you. And likewise, I know the work that you and Steve do, and it's very similar in terms of relating to people's pain and trauma. And I really, we're definitely connected in that way. Yeah.
Well, the other thing I want to say, it's changing the subject a little, and I don't want to take away from you all responding to Darald. But before everyone, I know everybody's got tons of things that they've got to go to. And I just have to tell you all that we are doing the inaugural international conference for FPI on February 5 and 6. And I wanted to bring that to your attention now because what we're hoping to accomplish is getting forward-thinking people and critical thinking people together at that conference. And I can't think of another group that I would love to see show up there and enrich our conversations in that conference than those of you here today. So we will definitely within the next week, but probably within the next day or two, you will be getting information about that conference. And I hope many of you are able to register. Again, that's going to be February 5 and 6. So I want to now.
Congratulations.
And just
Thank you.
one quick soundbite about that is that we are so excited that we have Jess Hill from Australia has signed on to be one of our keynote speakers. And if you don't know who Jess Hill is, I would encourage you to Google her. She wrote the book, See What You Made Me Do, which in my mind is one of the best domestic violence books out there. And the idea that she's going to be coming on very early in the morning where she's at to be a part of our conference is just amazing. We're thrilled with that. And we have a host of just remarkable speakers, but Jess Hill is one that we can say, you want to hear what she has to say. She's out there doing great things. So, yeah.
One other thing about that, you heard from Darald some of the power about the use of poetry, and you may have heard Jim L. Sasser talk about the use of poetry in the past, and we're looking forward to him sharing some more about that at the conference. So
That's great. That's great. Circling back, any other thoughts, ideas that stimulated you today? Anything else you want to say? Comments?
I just wanted to say that I really appreciated your sentiment that you had said about I apologize in advance because you will be the standard bearers in adopting new language and things like that. Um, I feel like I've experienced that as well, even just like in this work and like going and having conversations with other people. So I really appreciated that. I work with women who have used violence. So one of the things that has been a big barrier for them in their own change process and their own accountability is being frustrated that their partners aren't changing as well, and that making it difficult for them to continue on that path. So yeah, that's been kind of a hard place to be in, that like
we can't change our partners,
Yeah.
but we can change ourselves, maybe influence their change, right? But not necessarily guarantee that they're going to do it as well.
Right.
So yeah, I just really appreciated that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and that's a tough one, isn't it? I say to my people, and you probably say to yours, you're not responsible for how your partner responds, but you are responsible for how you respond to how she responds. And so that's the only control that we have. Yeah. Any other comments?
I'll just add that this whole talk has made me more aware of the more work I have to do on my own shame.
Oh yeah. 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 Boy, that's important. I don't know if you know who Brene Brown is. Does that name sound familiar? Well, I'm a student of Brene Brown. Now, actually, I was doing shame work when she was even in high school. So, but and I worked with Sharon Berlin, as I mentioned, who was a colleague at my School of Social Work at UW-Madison. But I love her work, and she actually reformatted Sharon Berlin's work into those four behaviors that I told you about. She's given them different names, but um, she's really talks about the importance of doing our own shame work, and because we get triggered, as well. Or I should say, we respond to those critical moments as well. So if you are a facilitator and you are working with a group of harm doers who are pretty skilled at lobbing little grenades out there, and in some way you're interpreting what they're saying as they're telling me I don't know what I'm doing, I'm inadequate, they're acting as if they're superior, and you respond to that with an escalation yourself because you haven't really dealt with your own shame. That's a problem, because then you're modeling the very behavior you're wanting them to change. And so it is important, to do that. And like Brene Brown says, we all have shame, every one of it. It's not as if we don't, we do. And it's everywhere. And we need to talk about it. And the thing about psychotherapy is ignored the whole field of shame for so long. And it's about time we started tuning into that and making it a part of our standard work. And because people are suffering, and they don't, and needlessly, they don't need to, because we can help with that, and deconstructing that belief that I'm inadequate and incorrectly so. It's just amazing work to do. So I invite you to do that work. And Brene Brown's work is really neat stuff. I went and spent a week with her at San Antonio at her program, and that was transformational for me. And I got in touch with my own shame as well. I think I went through 4 boxes of tissue, just coming to my own shame. And so I invite you to do that.
A quick comment. It's the, talking with guys, and so much guys talking about like the story they tell themselves and the crap we tell ourselves. And when you're talking about this, I was thinking, when you're saying, Maya, it's like, what's more powerful in our own life than our own voice and what we're telling our stories? It made me think of Mark Twain's, like something like I've suffered through many tragedies in my life, some of which actually occurred.
Exactly.
But just like how harmful we can be to ourselves and how that projects out to other people, because
Yeah.
we're stuck in that. But I just really appreciate everything you said, Darald. Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you.
I have to go to our all-day party.
All right.
Hope to connect later.
Take care, Jim.
Thanks,
Nice
everybody.
talking with you.
I really resonated too with what you shared about, this field has really kind of ignored shame. So my team and I recall our first FPI training, when we were supposed to check out about how we feel. And a few of us like had some big tears after. And when Steve had kind of asked what that was about, it was like we felt shame because of how we expected our participants to show up in the group room, and we kind of ignored their shame, right? When they would come with their shame barriers, we thought, well, they're just being resistive, they're just doing this, they're just doing that. So I think for us in this field, and that's why I said, like, when you said like this has been fully ignored, us as the facilitators have to understand the shame in a different lens than how we've been taught about it. So I just really appreciate you sharing that. And I think a lot of the work comes to us too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I I I actually constructed a 2-day workshop on shame that I present through UW Extensions and anybody who will invite me to come and talk about it. And it's a powerful workshop because people come and they expect me just to talk at them. And I give them a disclaimer before they come, and it's even in the literature. You're going to be asked to explore your own name. And it's interesting how people get angry. They come up with me during break.
Yeah.
You didn't tell us we're going to have to talk about our own shame. And I said, well, yeah, boy, it sounds like you're really kind of surprised by that and maybe frustrated that you're having to do that. And did you read the fine print? You know, because that's, I mean, you have to, I mean, in a workshop like that, you have to, be judicious in how much you share because to share the other thing I say about the work that I do, I don't get into the shame stuff until I make sure that these guys feel safe. Because if you don't have trust, you're not gonna share that. So the whole first 20 weeks of my program, I'm teaching them skills and teaching them about male privilege and entitlement and doing role plays and teaching them de-escalation techniques like systematic desensitization and progressive muscle relaxation. I'm not even talking about shame at that point because it's too risky. And I call it the shame work is really later stage work. And so it has to be done in a way that they feel safe to really talk about those feelings. Otherwise, you aren't going to get there. The first day if I said, we're going to talk about shame, how do you feel about that? They'd all get up and leave or they'd clam up and they'd never say another thing. So timing, is really, I've learned over time, timing is really important.
Yeah, Darald, thank you for saying all that. I was just curious if you would repeat the power principle. You kind of flew by that, and that was new language for me. And I was like, oh, I wanted to catch that, and I didn't get it. Could you go back through that?
Power principle goes like this. People who have very little power, or at the point where they perceive they have very little power, and I add on for the harm in a culture that says, when it comes to power, some is good, more is better, and too much is just right. Because as men, that's what we're taught. Part of that masculinity that Dorothy was talking about. When we're in a position where we feel powerless, we overuse what little power we have. What's the power we have to overuse to get what we want when nothing else is working? Power to do what?
Aggression. Yeah.
Yeah, power to be abusive or violent. And then the problem, of course, is that the part two of the principle is that when we use aggressiveness to get what we want, we give away our power. We give away the right to hold other people accountable. These guys want to know about what about those women? And I always say to them, we'll get to that once you can demonstrate that you're no longer making your behavior the focus of negative attention. Once you've done that, you're truly not being abusive, then we can address what about her. But until we do that, we can't even get there. So does that help, Steve?
Yeah, I love that idea of giving away our right to hold somebody else accountable. And I see that with my work with justice involved youth in the
Right.
kind of the prison incarceral setting.
Right.
They react strongly to somebody else, and then they're the ones that are in trouble, and they're the ones that are penalized, and
Right.
they don't see it. They see that they're maintaining their respect that way, right? And,
Exactly.
yeah.
I'm a former hockey player, believe it or not. Talk about contradictions, right? And you see this in hockey all the time. The person who starts it's never the person who gets tagged for it. It's the person who retaliates because they escalate the violence. It's like, come on, guys, figure it out. Hockey is not supposed to be a violent sport. It's supposed to be a finesse sport, but that's gotten lost somewhere along the way. I didn't play like that when I wasn't talented enough anyway, but that wasn't part of the game when I was playing hockey. It was to be able to outskate somebody, not beat the crap out of them. Anyway, a little sidebar.
While Steve Darald was wondering about the power, I was wondering about the wording you used regarding the different ways people address their shame.
Yeah.
We use a lot of Brene Brown, but I really appreciate the way you broke that down.
Okay.
Do you have a handout that you could send us regarding
Oh my God.
that?
Of course I do. So
love that.
So the four behaviors are the people use to protect their shame are aggressive behavior, on a scale from on that continuum that we all know about. So Brene Brown renamed it to, she calls pushing back. Grandiosity. I'm the very best or I'm the very worst. And I don't know what she calls. She calls these shields. I forget what she called that one. Perfectionism and its first cousin, procrastination. And she calls it something like that. And then the last one is withdrawal. So pushing back or abusive behavior, that's one. Grandiosity, perfectionism, procrastination, and withdrawal are the 4 behaviors.
Mhm.
And if you talk with your participants about that, they will resonate with it. Most of them say, "Oh yeah, I do every one of those." And then then it's about teaching them how it's designed to keep you protected from your shame, but it doesn't make it any better. It doesn't fix it. It just perpetuates it.
Right.
And I say
Yeah.
to these guys, how many times do I say to these guys, no matter what, you are worthy of love and belonging, no matter what. And I say that over and over and over again. And I don't know that it sinks in for a long time. It's so hard to overcome the trauma that they've been through and the pain of being disregarded and disrespected and being treated poorly, that it takes a while to get through that. And the guys who come back, it's no mystery to me why the guys who come back are usually the ones who want to do more shame work. They're really they're hungry for that.